Hey guys, it feels like every time I post a post commentary, I have to have some disclaimer about why this is somewhat late. Anyway, I'm gonna have a disclaimer as to why this was somewhat late, but this one might be a good one. So, I thought that I was gonna do a post commentary on a video dropping tomorrow. The preview will be out already. But I can say that in terms of scope and like the project size and all that, production, all that, this is probably the largest video of the year. Not super long duration wise, but a lot of effort went into that one. So I'm looking forward to showing you guys that later. So as per usual, this is just a completely custom intro made by Blitz to sync up with the music, which I think was pretty cool. And then, of course, we immediately transition into using a swoon sound effect because this is basically the mini recap. Now, this won't be here for every single episode, but generally I'll try to freshen people up on what we talked about last time. And in this case, since there isn't too much, we could talk about it quickly, which is, look, everything got nerfed, and then we had a meta where the easy weapon was broken. This is something that came up when doing the script process. It was one of the nice things that we found before, which is basically when doing these videos that are about one episode, it flows much better to cover the nerfs to the meta stuff in that same episode. So like when we talked about 1.2, we ended on the 1.3 nerfs. Now we do the 1.3 nerfs and we're going to end, or sorry, the 1.3 buffs, and then we're going to end on 1.4 nerfs. So it transitions you in terms of like, this is the kind of the whole rise and fall of the meta we're talking about. And this is yet another episode that's focused on one patch, which happens a lot early on. It'll happen until we get to 2.0s. Though I think technically, if I remember, next episode is 1.4 and 2.0, and then I think 2.1, 2.2 is together. I'm not entirely sure. But 1.4 and 2.0 are very similar in that case, if that's how it's done, but it might also be that 1.4 is in fact its own video. I just don't quite remember. Something else. Now, unfortunately, a good portion of this video is focused on just kind of going through patch changes for a bit, in which I don't really have too much to say about this, other than going over, how crazy it is that all these buffs happened at once. But for the most part, the presentation is very simple, and then this was also a case where we didn't actually have the footage for each patch set. We ended up having to use either prior footage or stuff from Dude's video comes up kind of clutch here. So the footage we're working with is also a bit limited. It's mostly just about flowing through pace-wise and having, overlays when it matters, like stuff for the Inkstorm increase. We see Inkstorm increase, and this is about how large this radius buff matters. Like, smaller change means a lot, which is so funny now, because, like, I made this whole thing to explain an Inkstorm radius increase, and then in real time before this episode got released, there was an Inkstorm radius increase. Here's another thing that was changed. So the Stingray video that comes out tomorrow was supposed to be before this. So there was going to be a point where I, directed to the video and was like, I go about it in much more detail here. Ended up having to cut that, sadly. The Stingray video could kind of go alongside this series, technically. Like, obviously, it's not a part of the series, but it does serve as a nice extra footnote for how insane Ray was. And it was definitely to the point where it deserved its own video. Especially, like, the thing that got me to make the Ray video, I mean, it's off topic, but whatever, is the fact that I've seen people try to compare it to stuff like Zuko when it was broken, and, like, there's no comparison. You can't compare this with other stuff. We have had nothing like Ray before or after it. For a few patches now, there's going to be this segment of going over, like, kind of smaller buffs that don't really matter too much, but add up later. Again, it's kind of just part of the fact that main weapons got nerfed down, or some other subs were undertuned, like Beacon, for so long that it's important to understand these things seeing use wasn't out of nowhere. There has to be, like, a trend for some of the stuff that's more common. This was something that was, like, a big process when scripting, where I kind of had to decide, like, what buffs do I talk about? What do I not talk about? And there's a whole lot that I scrapped. I definitely did not cover the majority of them, but I feel like I generally did a good job balancing what is important to talk about and what isn't important to talk about for understanding the overall narrative of the history of the game. I guess, like, the closest comparison I can make with this is when Range got its buff that did the same thing in S3. Some of you guys were probably around enough to remember that if you paid attention to patch notes. But yeah, Machine at the time, was an extremely solid main weapon, mostly just because it was one of the things that survived. And also, what I didn't talk about in this video, because I felt like it was a little off topic, I guess, two of the main reasons that machine wasn't good in S1 wasn't that it wasn't a particularly strong main weapon, or actually it was three reasons. Damage and defense was terrible for it. It made it more inconsistent. Two, it did not have an invincibility special, which sucks. And three, it did not one-shot kill. In a game where you had to one-shot kill because everyone could pop invincibilities and take fights super fast. It just was not in the right game. So that, paired with its competition being nerfed, put it in an extremely good spot right away. I'm actually not sure why we had this tape over it instead of just remaking it on a kit editor. I don't know why. That was the decision that was made. I saw it and I didn't really question it. I just thought, all right, I guess we're doing that now. And then, yeah, this is a good match example where we have, 4 rays on each team, and we have 3 ballers, and then there's just a V-shot. Like, very, very good example footage in the background here. I believe this is Set to Destroy X against a Japanese team in this case. Dude, look how slow Heavy moves in this clip.
Few other ray weapons.
This is run speed Heavy. Like, this is probably like 3 mains of run speed at least.
That's all use. Most
and
notable
like,
would be
it's so
Splat
slow.
Charger and Heavy Splatling. Charger
and it used to be worse.
It a lot better back then and mostly outclassed Heavy since it got its buff back. But Heavy's ray output also wasn't.
I would have had a full charge showcase in there. In hindsight, I probably would have included that as well, because that was the more crazy one. The tap shots were good, but the full charges were, like, frankly ridiculous for how many you got. Splat Charger painted very, very well. It took a long time for them to fix it. And yeah, this is also originally why this episode wasn't going to be a post-commentary, is because it's about Aerospray meta. Like, you know, normally when we talk about a meta like this, there'd be some interesting things to say about it, but there's kind of 2 main points here, one of which is Ray, and the second of which is, like, Aerospray. Ray got its own dedicated video, and Aerospray, it just paints and spams a broken special. And, like, of course it does. It's an Aerospray meta. This is the only way this weapon ever becomes meta. Like, as comments have correctly pointed out, is when it can do this. When it can paint and spam the special. And that's all it did. It just charged him with a broken baller. So as soon as you understand baller's overtuned, not hard to get across, there was like 5 buffs and a broken special power effect, you get it. That's it. It's just the special was that good that you would spam it. And that's the entire thing. I'm sorry, Aerospray fans. Even when your weapon is good, it's still a little boring.
Like I said, Baller could basically do anything it wanted. It even worked against Stingray, which basically had no way of quickly breaking it. Oh,
and that is very worth noting because Ray became much more prominent in 1.4. Like, it was good in 1.3. You know, we just saw a version with 2 Rays on each team. But, like, everyone knew Baller was more broken, and Baller was an actual answer to Ray. Like, you could not break it. It just tanked it. You could just pop Baller and you'd be fine. And, like, a bunch of people on your team would have Ballers. You would just keep barreling forward, rolling in your little hamster ball, and you'd be fine, because you had like a 7-8 second duration at the time, and you had like 400 HP, and like all these resistances. You were fine. It didn't matter. I really believed in this weapon. I think if we were, unfortunately by some hell, stuck in this meta for much longer, that eventually this would have been the better weapon. It has an actual bomb. You know, curling is a real bomb. It's still 170. It's a definitely better main weapon gun. I think, you know, we'll never know for sure, so I can't make the claim that it was actually better, just that it was close. But I do hold in my opinion, especially looking back, but did at the time too, that this was probably the better option. I gave it an honorable mention because people did pick it, but realistically people picked it because we had 52 players in S1. This was not really actually worth picking. This was misleading. I don't think I should have mentioned it as a meta option, even in this paragraph. It's just technically inaccurate in my eyes. See, this one did actually make a little bit of sense compared to 52 because Burst was still really broken, but yeah. And then
the Splat.
Umbrella was not that common, but it was worth mentioning because it's another one of those cases where if we were stuck in this meta for longer, people would have actually used it. Like, this was weaker Brella, but Brella tanked Baller. Like, you couldn't bump into Baller. You would bump into Baller with your player. You would take 49 damage because you'd run a sub-bomb defense. You could take 2 Baller bumps, and then when it exploded, you would hold your shield and your shield would block it. And even with the 8-frame slower shield, plenty of time to react shield a Baller, and it didn't break your shield. And you could actually stop the Baller. Like, this was the only thing that actually put a dent in it. And it did paint like crazy, and it had 160 rain, which was very good. So, like, this weapon did have a genuine, actual niche because it was good into Baller. right? It was basically supported as worse damage than it does now, but it could actually tank it. It didn't have multipliers into it. I guess this segment's personal opinion there, but yeah, I mean, I think 1.3 meta was generally disliked. It had the factor of people were happy to be freed off of triple try, which, yeah, obviously gets irritating after a while, but I'd argue this meta is definitely less skill expressive. At least with the triple try meta, you were fighting with your gun. You are not fighting with your gun.
Well,
nice little detail on the GooTuber one that I'm sure I don't really have to point out here for people to notice, but it's there.
special cost cut back by about 10 points for special, and Aerospray.
So L3, vanilla L3 here, I don't believe I talk about again until I talk about it in Turf War meta. Like, at some point I go, oh yeah, VL3 eventually goes to 220p. And I had to debate where to put that in, because normally I don't mention Turf War. I think I mentioned it around the same time as I did the previous Meta History series, which is basically around 4.7. But it's funny that, like, I mentioned L3 here, it gets, like, a 10 points for special nerf, and then way down the line, we get an additional plus 40 and a painting nerf, and, like, an MPU nerf, all on top of that, you know, way later. It's kind of funny.
They just got a huge painting nerf. I get it was common, but, like, this was very clearly Baller's fault. Several weapons.
And then, yeah, Arrow got, like, way over nerfed in painting, which is just hilarious. But yeah, the patches were very, I don't want to say disorganized. It was very, there was no real direction. It was kind of just throw things at the general problem. Like, they know what stuff isn't good enough, and they know what stuff is too good, but there's, like, no idea on how to fix it at this time. Right? Like, there's no, okay, we want to, you know, like, nowadays when they buff Splash, they're like, we want Splash to fight more, but we don't want to spam specials that much, so we're going to do a range buff to hold the line, but nerf the paint down. For Gal, we don't want it to wall spam it as much, but we do still want it to multi-kill and be like this aggro shooter, so we're going to give it, you know, this velocity buff. You know, they explain and have, like, a vision for what they want the weapons to be after the patch. Does not exist here to the same degree at all. This is just, we gotta do something, man. These weapons are terrible. And that's basically what changed the meta here, right? Like, stuff like Inkstorm was already good, Ray was already good, Bubble Blower I think was even already good at this time, though I think it got a buff in 1.4 too, but even in 1.4 it didn't get used until later. And it's like, all these specials were good, but, like, broken special of the week would just overshadow them. Like, even Ray was somewhat overshadowed. So it's like, you have specials that are inherently super broken and will immediately have to talk about them next time, even if they don't get drastically changed, like in Ray's case. But it's just the factor of some giant broken thing was just sitting in front of them, taking all the attention. Which is just kind of, like, it's strange, but that happened a lot with the way S2 balanced their games. Okay, this is inexcusable, though. I think a lot of Splatoon 2's balance changes were bad, but this was fucking crazy. I don't know why this happened. I really don't. Like, I can understand this one. I can understand it working into Baller. Baller's really broken, whatever. This is just out of nowhere. We can see people with Ray better. For no reason at all. And I genuinely don't know why. And, like, they could have done nothing to Ray, and I think it would have been less tilting than doing this. Like, imagine... Actually, I don't have to imagine it, right? Because Bucket got a random Tri-Strike buff when it was good, but Bucket's, like, nowhere near this behemoth. I guess I don't really have a comparison, but it's like, at the time where people were starting to realize how annoying Ray was going to be, seeing this and seeing Baller get, like, shot down, it's like, this is going to take over, and everyone knew it was going to take over. It was immediately obvious what was going to happen after this, which makes me really confused as to how Nintendo staff themselves did not notice this when balancing the game. Maybe it was just they had other stuff to focus on, maybe just things were going full steam ahead with the game. I don't know, but, like, even if that was the case, the best you could do is at least not throw out a random buff. So yeah, one of the strangest patch decisions ever made in the entire series is this buff right here. Completely nonsensical.
Now?
Okay, Machine should not have been a part of this overlay. I'm not sure what should. I'm not sure what else would go here. Honestly, probably Tent. Tent should have gone here. This could have just been a Brella overlay image. This was, again, one of the things that I just didn't think about as much. Call it burnout from, like, checking drafts and stuff. Like, I should have absolutely called for more significant changes here. than I
But a
did.
lot of-
Before I dip, I did not forget, here is the script for version 1.3. Pretty normal this time. And then, yeah, I had the Brella glitch here, which you might have noticed is cut. That is because the Brella glitch actually got patched in 1.4. So this was actually in the wrong thing, and I didn't notice until the script draft. So I had it moved, and you will see this in episode 4. And then, yeah, for the most part, very, very simple script for here. Not too long for this one. Very simple episode, but again, just too many things happen in patches 1.3 and 1.4 respectively to the point where these have to become split episodes. But yeah, thanks for watching.